Hi there, Johannes here. I have been asked to say a few words about intuition in clinical practice. Whenever we understand something new, intuition plays a role. I think without the element of intuition, we would simply be learning more and more about what we already know. So, intuition is central when it comes to anything that's creative or innovative. A quote by Ian McGilchrist. It goes like this: even rationality is grounded in a leap of intuition. There is no way you can really prove that rationality is a good way of looking at the world. We intuit that it is very helpful. The end point of rationality is to demonstrate the limits of rationality. Again, so says Ian McGilchrist. And by the way, this will be a slight digression, but the fact that there are no logical axioms that can prove that logical propositions are more verifiable, more truthful than other ways of looking at the world, that's part of why the Vienna School and the logical positivists, why they fell apart in the end. But again, I digress. On page 3 in Dr. Davenlou's Unlocking the Unconscious, he writes, "These interventions have often been reached intuitively," end quote. I'm also reminded of something that Marvin Squirman relayed to me once. He had just patched things up with Dr. Davenlou after they'd had a falling out. The year was 2015. He was in Montreal sitting in Dr. Davenlou's office, and they were watching Dr. Davenlou's work. And Marvin would often ask Davenlou, why did you do this? Or how did you know to do that? And oftentimes Davenlou would be able to offer his clinical thinking, his rationale. But a lot of other times, per Marvin, he would just shrug and say, I don't know. So when I think of utilizing intuition, I don't think of neglecting empirical evidence. I think that use of intuition should not negate attending to the important parameters of assessment. And if our intuitions appear entirely disconnected from the empiricism, from the evidence at hand, or if our intuitions compel us to engage in wild or reckless interventions, I think we'd be wise to question these so-called intuitions. I think we also need to be mindful of leaning on the concept of intuition as a vehicle for undisciplined actions or really just unwarranted justifications and confirmation bias needs. So having offered this word of caution, however, let me try to explain how I see the proper use of intuition. Central to my thinking here is the idea that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. That which makes you, you, for example, is greater than your nails, than your hair, than your brain, than your memories. So too, Bach's Allegro is greater than the individual musical notes that make up the musical work as a whole. An attention that only attends to the individual notes fails to appreciate the song as a whole. So intuition, then, is the capacity to pick up the melody arising from individual notes, individual bits of data. Think of the client who's highly invested in coming across as motivated, for example. Now, we normally rely on things like sighing and things of that nature to suss out genuine will from compliance. But that's not foolproof. We can get smaller sighs even when defensive compliance dominates genuine will. So the ability to discern sincerity, to what extent the patient appears to actually stand behind what they declare, comes from an ability to attend to more than individual bits of information, individual notes, to stay in the metaphor. To sense the melody of the song as a whole, to discern the more subtle, ineffable aspects of the patient's presentation. And that's also central, by the way, to making the enterprise more human, as opposed to just a technical enterprise. But yeah, so discerning sincerity, emotional charge, genuine presence and spontaneity from the appearance of such, from the appearance of engagement and presence, that tends to require more than attending to different data points. or discerning that our normal way of doing things just doesn't apply in this particular individual instance, for example. So these sorts of things tend to require a connection to a felt sense that can capture the whole, which again is greater than the sum of its parts. I think of a client of mine. He had declared his will to do the work. He was sighing, and for, not always, but for several sessions, we were focused right on the money, right on the front of the system or the major column of defense. And yet something felt off, out of alignment. I ignored this sense with this particular client for a while anyway, and we were pretty soon in misaligned territory. It turns out that our work had activated enough trauma-laden memories that had been imported and placed upon me, recreating an old pathological relationship with his father. But in spite of the green lights that I got, my intuition was picking up on dynamics not available to the naked eye. I can think of other cases where something alerted me to go easy and hold off on applying the kind of pressure that I normally would in order to get a clear psychodiagnostic picture. And at the end, this, turned out to be a very wise choice. Another quote by Ian McGilchrist from his newest book, The Matter with Things, goes like this. Creative intuitions frequently begin with not knowing, with the recognition that the obvious does not apply, that something here does not fit. So, if you're a therapist who puts stock in this felt sense, while also attending to the empirical, at the same time checking yourself for confirmation bias mistakes, know that you're not alone. And if the figure of Davenlu means anything to you, you're also in very good company. So proper use of intuition, it opens you up to ways of knowing that go beyond what can be known through just filtering sensory data through the lens of our knowledge modules. Danish scholar and psychotherapist Mikkel Rare Langberg, I'll probably butcher that last name, but anyway, in his soon-to-be published book titled Fundamentals of Davenlu's Intensive Short-Term Dynamic Psychotherapy, Volume 1, he writes, and I quote, "As we saw Freud stress in an earlier chapter, the therapist's capacities for empathic attunement and psychological intuition constitute the therapist's most important tools. If technique is the vehicle, attunement and intuition are its drivers." End of quote. There's a saying in Zen, not knowing is most intimate. And that's what ISTDP is all about. It's about real intimacy with ourself, the world, with the other. So learn, but then learn how to put some of that learning in the back seat so you can gain access to a more profound way of knowing. A way of knowing that has less to do with the brain, but more to do with the empathic attunement that comes from being connected to our bodies, our guts, our bones, our hearts. So, for those of you that may still cringe at the idea of intuition as utterly unscientific, remember that though we might try to operationalize the Unconscious Therapeutic Alliance, this central concept in ISTDP, it's ultimately a very ephemeral and esoteric concept. Good luck trying to get construct validity and inter-rater reliability measures around the Unconscious Therapeutic Alliance. So, you can't really have your cake and eat it too. If you care about being consistent anyway, you can't profess trust in or faith in this force that we call the Unconscious Therapeutic Alliance, while at the same time be a hard-nosed, reductionistic empiricist. The two don't go together.